It's November 3rd, 1997, Premier League match day between West Ham and Crystal Palace at Upton Park in East London. Two men walk towards the stadium. A nod from the ticket taker, and they're into the grounds, moving with purpose towards the stands. No pre-match pints, no quick cigarettes, no trips to the betting window. They sit in their seats, and the match begins.
Not the best of clearances. This is Shipperley! And it's a gift goal!
The pair in the stands don't react as the stadium erupts into an angry buzz around them. A terrible goal, really. Botched clearance. 1-0 Crystal Palace.
Shipperley. Oh, well done by Shipperley! Super goal! Slightly fortuitous. He got a lucky bounce, but took it so very well.
Another goal and another stoic non-reaction from the men. The West Ham fans are incensed. A fluffed clearance and a lucky bounce, and now they're down 2-0. The match continues.
Hartson! West Ham are back in the game. Hartson's been threatening to score. At long last, Kevin Miller is beaten by a classic set-piece goal.
Finally, a well-worked goal. The two men exchange glances. It's not enough. Not yet. Halftime comes and goes, with neither man standing from their seat. Then, in the 65th minute, Frank Lampard nets himself a magic moment.
Abu, neatly to Lampard. Still Frank Lampard! From 2-0 down to 2-2.
It's time. One of the men reaches into his pocket and presses a button on what appears to be a remote garage door opener. Suddenly,
thanks in part to a sweet strike from the right boot of Frank Lampard, on whom the lights have now gone out.
the men stand up in the inky shadows of the stands. They gently push through the surrounding supporters, equal parts elated by the equalizer and stunned by the plunge into darkness. Making their way through the concourse by touch, the pair emerge into a crisp fall London night. They can hear the sounds of the match announcer trying to explain the situation to the fans, that they're working on getting the floodlights back on. The men get into a car with their driver waiting for them and motor off into the night, abandoning the match before the match has to be abandoned.
And that's exactly what happened. 20 minutes into the second half, just as the goal had gone in, the equaliser, the lights went out, and they stayed that way for half an hour or so. The match was abandoned.
Thousands of miles away, on the other side of the world, a TV clicks off. Mission accomplished. I'm Harry Swartout. Let's play to the echo of the whistle. Watching a Premier League match live from anywhere in the world is normal today, but in the 90s, not so much. Back then, the Prem wasn't the hulking international behemoth of finance and football it is now. It was still very much a domestic league, where the stadium was more likely to be filled with people who had grown up walking distance from the pitch than the posher crowd commuting in from the suburbs. With those inner-city supporters, the game had remained rough. There were muggings outside the grounds, fights in the stands, and even the players couldn't escape the verbal abuse hurled at them by opposing and sometimes their own supporters. It wasn't a modern game, but the Prem wanted to change that. Here's football writer, historian, and avowed Liverpool supporter Peter Kenny Jones.
It was still recognisably traditional English football, with supporters attending old grounds and getting a lot of their information from newspapers, radio, teletext, match of the day. There's the arrival of more international stars and managers. There's these new or redeveloped all-seater stadiums. Man United are becoming a global force. Arsene Wenger's Arsenal are changing attitudes towards tactics, and maybe you don't have to have 14 pints after a game. Maybe you can just go and play a match and go home and have a glass of water. That might be just as good for you. The football is no longer be seen as a hooligans game. It's becoming more of a family-friendly, shall we say, type of match.
A friendly, more inviting game meant a larger crowd could feel comfortable enjoying the matches. Increased demand. Traditionally, supporters had crammed themselves into stadiums week after week with the only alternative being listening on the radio or watching on TV if your club happened to be the match of the week. If you were a supporter living abroad, the best you could hope for was a write-up in the next morning's paper. And there were a growing number of international fans of the Prem.
It's because of the foreign influence in the game. You know, if you're French, you want to see Arsenal because they've got Arsene Wenger, who used to watch smoking his cigarettes at Monaco and, you know, learned all this stuff in Japan. He's an interesting philosopher of the game. He's got all those French players as well, and you've got like the likes of Jürgen Klinsmann, let's say, who's going to Tottenham. There's a lot of different nationalities coming in. People are interested in something they can relate in, and it was new and exciting, and people like new exciting things with a bit of foreign influx.
With increased demand came increased coverage, both in volume and in reach. Sky Television Network was innovating how the game was packaged and where it was broadcast.
Obviously, Sky being innovative, really, isn't it? In that they were trying new things, and the idea of Monday Night Football now, how we watch it with Jamie Carragher every week and a guest, like that. If you compare that to what we used to see in the 60s on Match of the Day, it's a massive change. So it's how you're changing the public's perception of football.
Slick promotionals like this one would air before every match, helping associate the PL brand with the ever-rising perception of English football.
Fantastic goal! Yes! The sprint is complete!
Football. We know how you feel about it. Because we feel the same.
That's the voice of actor Sean Bean, by the way. Surprisingly, he doesn't die at the end of the commercial. He does show that the Premier League were ready to use a globally recognized figure to become a globally recognized league. So they started broadcasting more and more matches live, around the world.
Premier League in the late 1990s was beginning to realise it could become like a global entertainment product, and there was more live matches and an increasingly sophisticated coverage of the game. Sky was making it feel bigger and more glamorous. There's a lot of excitement about the money that's coming into the game and the international players and the fact that people around the world are like so heavily invested in English football.
Supporters around the world became invested in the Prem. But the Premier League hadn't yet invested back in themselves. You see, the new money from the international broadcast hadn't filtered down to the teams yet. And so many of the football grounds were old. Like, really old.
A lot of these grounds were still old stadiums from the 1800s that are still standing, and maybe just had a lick of paint and a few seats added to it. Look at Goodison, and this is not me as a Liverpool fan having a dig at Goodison. Last season, they moved into a new ground. Before that, that's an old ground that's been there for a long time. So if you went to have a wee at half time at Goodison and there was a leak on your head from above, I don't think you'd be that surprised. Even the Floodlights themselves, they come in like the 50s, 60s anyway, so even the Floodlights have been there at this point for 40, 30, whatever years. So yeah, some of these will be rickety old, rusting, big structures in the corner of the stadiums, and again, it wouldn't be a shock.
That's why, when the lights went out at Crystal Palace West Ham, nobody suspected a thing. Just an old generator in an old stadium showing its age. Again, no eyebrows were raised about a month later on December 22nd, 1997, when the floodlights at Arsenal Wimbledon popped just 13 seconds into the half with the score 0-0. Or perhaps, more surprisingly, when they popped again 20 minutes later after the lights had been reset. In fact, no one noticed anything at all for more than a year, until February 1999. After the break, we'll shed some light on the darkness of the Floodlight scam and how its legacy has led to the match-fixing minefield of the present. This story takes place more than a year after the first one, February 10th, 1999, 3 days before Liverpool-Charlton FC match day. It's after business hours. The two men step out of their car, nod to the driver, and make their way across the empty car park towards the Valley grounds. Their inside man is where he's supposed to be, and they enter through a gate that he unlocks. The duo disappear into the bowels of this century-old stadium, But they don't make their way towards a meticulously manicured pitch or the locker room to steal kits. They want the generator room. Once inside, they find what they're looking for. One wires a small device to the electrical setup, while the other deftly tapes it in place. It's that simple. They begin to make their way back through the tiny, damp cinder block corridors into the English winter night. When?
Early this afternoon, the football authorities were informed by the Metropolitan Police and Charlton Athletic that 4 people had been arrested at Charlton's ground in South London last night. Their arrest followed damage to electrical equipment connected to the floodlights there. Those in custody are neither players nor officials of Charlton Athletic. We understand one of them is employed by an outside company which is used by the club. The 3 others are believed to be foreign nationals.
Three days before the February 13th, 1999 Liverpool-Charlton FC match, the police made a sting. At the time, Andy Sellers was the detective superintendent of the Metropolitan Police, but nobody in his unit discovered the floodlight failure pattern. They were tipped off.
We first became aware of it when a source came to us reporting that there was something going on at Charlton Football Club. This individual had been approached by a member of staff who was asking whether he could give covert entry to the ground outside of sort of working hours. So I sent a surveillance team down there, and a couple of nights later, we saw these individuals clearly being let in by a member of the staff there. We still weren't 100% sure what was going on, but we just stayed where we were until they were leaving, and then my guys apprehended them.
The source was David Rushin, a security guard at Charlton's Valley football ground. He had been offered £5,000 by his fellow security guard to ignore the CCTV cameras and forego his usual patrol route. He knew nothing of the plan, however, just about the bribery. Detective Superintendent Sellers had to find out what was going on.
Turns out 2 Malaysians and somebody from Hong Kong. We took them back to the hotel they were staying in, and we found some electrical units, which originally weren't entirely sure what they were, but in the meantime, some other of my guys, the forensic guys, had been into the ground, and when they got to the generator room, they found all this wiring, extra taping, and one of these units attached to the generators. So we quickly worked out that they were trying to make the floodlights fail. The next question was, how were they going to do that? And probably more importantly, why?
Why is a good question. Let's look at what we know. The Premier League had just started broadcasting games live, internationally. It was now possible to bet on these games from the other side of the world. That sounds like a motive to me. But why blow the floodlights? Why not just bribe a player? Andy Sellers followed the question all the way to the Far East, where the conspirators were from.
Once we started making inquiries in the Far East, we started to understand this whole illegal betting arrangements run by syndicates controlled by the triads. So it was sort of local matches. But over time, their credibility was trashed because nobody believed there was so much fixing going on. So these triads turned their attention to somewhere where there was still some integrity, i.e. the British First Division as it was then, but they had to have a way of fixing games if they needed to, and obviously what they didn't have was the control of lots of players. So they went down the technical route. It was the rules they imposed around when the score stood. So as soon as the second half started, so at least one of those games, the floodlights failed 13 seconds into the second half. Most of the punters were betting on the stronger team. So Charlton were the weak team, Liverpool were the strong team, but they needed to be in a position to be able to stop the game. And so that's how they applied the control. They didn't have to rely on players or anyone else. They could do it all remotely.
It's an interesting rule. The score of any match abandoned after halftime stands. One that the Far East Triads implemented expressly to fix matches and drain money from their betting clientele. It worked like this. The Triads set the odds on the favorites to -1/2 goal. This means you subtract a half goal from the team's final score to determine the betting winner. The vast majority of their bettors put money on the favorites. Then, syndicate representatives would blow the lights the moment the score became even or advantageous for the underdog in the second half. That score then stood for the gambling outcome. West Ham Crystal Palace and Arsenal Wimbledon ended in draws, which meant that the half goal is subtracted from the favorite, and poof, the Triads cash in the upset against all those people who bet on the favorite. The reason that anybody even put up with that kind of obvious rigged system was because it was the only game in town. And you don't mess with the Triads.
I had to go over to the Far East and talk to some of the law enforcement guys over there. And I said, well, how does this work? They said, well, the punters they make contact with the Triads however they do that. They place their bets. They're normally betting on the stronger team, but they don't part with their money at that moment. So I said, so what happens? So, well, if they've lost a bet, then it's collected afterwards. So I said, well, what if somebody forgets to pay? And they said, nobody forgets or refuses to pay. So this was really organised crime. Our governing body were really concerned because, again, it undermined the integrity of our football. The fact that it was foreign born, I guess, reassured them a little bit.
It must have reassured them a lot. There wasn't much uproar in the UK about the scam from the press or the fans. The whole incident faded into obscurity pretty quickly. Peter Kenny-Jones, despite his knowledge of football history and devotion to Liverpool, had never thought much about it.
I don't want to maybe ruin your story too much, but it's not something I've seen discussed a lot. I learned a lot of it researching here. I'd heard of it, and so it's still interested me, not something I'd fully dived into. So I would probably guess most people are not aware of this.
There were a couple reasons for the fan apathy. First of all, it didn't actually change any of the match results. Unlike the Triads' imposed score rule, Premier League rules stated if a match was abandoned, it would be replayed at a later date. Favorites Arsenal and West Ham ended up winning their replay matches. No harm, no foul. Secondly, there wasn't really anything to be done. Sure, the four defendants, the technicians Eng Hua Lim and Chi Kyu Ong, the driver, Yuen Liu, and Roger Firth, the security guard who was bribed, were found guilty of conspiracy to cause a public nuisance. Whatever that means. Here's Firth in a TV interview describing their surprisingly light sentencing.
I got 18 months. Two of them got 4 years, one got 2.5 years. But it's something I totally regret now. It really is something I totally regret. But I did it.
But that was all for one match. Liverpool-Charlton. The other matches...
What was interesting is once we identified these two other games, I sent some guys into the West Ham ground and they went into the generator room, because what happened was our technicians were looking at the videos of these floodlight failures, because these matches were being televised, and they noticed that actually the West Ham lights went off. Two of them went, and then the other two went, almost in a second, and you would hardly notice it. But the reason for that is they had two generators, one for two floodlights and one for the other. When my guys went in the generator room, we actually found still some tape taped to some of the electrical cables, which is exactly the same as the tape they used at Charlton. So we were more than convinced that they were responsible for that one as well. And the circumstances of the other game, because of the timing when the lights went out, it was pretty obvious that was the same. But finding the evidence, obviously those were the events that had gone passed before. So our lawyers advised that what we should do is stick to the evidence we had for the Charlton-Liverpool game and make sure that we presented a good prosecution for that.
So just the one game was pinned on Lim, Ong, and Liu. There was even more unused evidence against them. While Andy Sellers was investigating the conspirators, he pulled their passports to see where they had been traveling to. Along with stamps from England for the matches he already suspected, he found some other trips too.
When we mapped their movements all over the world, we mapped it against quite a lot of under-18s, under-20s, under-21s international tournaments. They could have been doing what they were doing in the UK and making Floodlights fail. That was way beyond our remit. We were busy enough trying to just deal with what we had in the UK. So we didn't make any further inquiries, but for someone like you, Harry, if you were to go back and look around that period at those sorts of young international games, you know, the youngsters, you might find there was some floodlight failures. I don't know, but we didn't extend the scope of our investigation that far.
The three conspirators got off easy because of the sheer difficulty in monitoring their web of crime. The triads pulling the strings from afar? Of course, untouchable. You don't have to dig through nearly 30-year-old youth tournament box scores to know that match fixing was, and is, a bigger problem than one cop, corporation, or country can handle. When I heard the story of new technology, live broadcast, influencing professional sports through global gambling, I thought, boy, that seems familiar. The Floodlight scam was the canary in the coal mine for tech-assisted instant match fixing. But now, instead of live broadcast and circuit breakers, the new technology is instant gambling on your phone.
DraftKings, listen to me. You listen good. I appreciate you for recognizing how valuable my time is. But instantly, stop. You're not gonna make me sweat a little bit? Oh, look, wait a minute. There's my $200. That was fast.
Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Bet just $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly.
John Cohen leads gambling policy for the American Institute for Boys and Men and is author of the book Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. And he sees the similarities.
Following a 2018 Supreme Court decision and following states sort of going, pun intended, all in on sports gambling, we have a technologically supercharged sports gambling app on our phones and the ability to bet on Malaysian women's doubles badminton or the next point in a Czech table tennis on a perfectly legitimate, perfectly regulated, perfectly legal platform that was unimaginable to a bettor 10 years ago who had to deposit money into some weird account based in Curacao to try to get $50 on the Lions game.
There have been updates to the strategy in the last 30 years, certainly. It's all legal now, so bookies manipulate the lines, not the outcome of the games, to make their money. More importantly, those full scoreline bets that the triads relied on to win? Too risky. Instead, there's the micro bet, a juiced-up prop bet made possible by instant gambling.
Odds for something like football or soccer or basketball will change constantly over the course of the game on the actual, over under even, or the line, the point spread of the game itself, not to mention the advent of a type of bet that was not available on the illegal market, which are called micro bets, this is speed of the next pitch, who's going to win the next point in a tennis match or a table tennis match, whether someone's going to miss or hit their next free throw, and so on. Those bets are only possible because of these integrated data partnerships created with the gambling companies, and the illegal market, as far as I know, was never able to sort of offer those kinds of things. But even just like some random tennis match happening on the other side of the world, or right here in your local NBA game or whatever, whether the 15th player on the roster is going to have over under 3.5 rebounds. There's no universe in which illegal market would even bother to offer a market on those kinds of things, but that is something that is very much offered to consumers for the first time.
With micro betting, controlling the outcome of an entire match, say by having to cut the power, becomes obsolete. You can much more easily reach your desired outcome by paying off a single player to perform a single action that most likely will affect the game in no way at all. Take John Tay Porter, a marginal NBA player with gambling debts.
In the case of John Tay Porter, just for example, who is like the 15th player on the Toronto Raptors who's alleged to have checked himself into a couple games and then out of a couple games claiming he was sick in order to have a bunch of bets on his unders all hit, he had a gambling addiction of some kind of his own, lost a bunch of money and owed a bunch of people money, and the way he promised to pay them back was colluding with them to help them make their money back by betting $85,000 or whatever it was that Jonte Porter was going to have under 7.5 rebounds, as if betting $85,000 on a Jonte Porter parlay isn't going to set off every single red flag in the known universe. You don't need to bet on even the outcome of the game. You don't even need to bet on like whether a certain player is going to score a certain number of goals. You can sort of fractionalize a game into any single number of individual incidents or moments and gamble on those.
Being able to bet on these tiny moments that get lost in the flow of the game makes stopping match fixing way harder. And it looks like we're going to have to rely not on cops and tips, but on the gambling companies themselves to do it. Match fixers now make their money at the expense of the odd makers. So the bookies are now the ones with the motivation and the data to stop it.
Thanks to this post-2018 integration of league data with sports betting companies and the like, we have the best detection monitoring software ever, and we can immediately raise red flags when someone bets a whole bunch of money on a Jonte Porter under, or when we take suspicious bets from brand new accounts about whether the first pitch of the 7th inning is going to be outside the strike zone, and so on. So they are found out that way, or they sort of tell on themselves in some ways by placing these sort of large, out of character, suspicious bets, and then the companies will investigate and so on and so forth. They are doing it better and faster than we had before, identifying suspicious betting activity, flagging it, and then setting it up for immediate investigation.
There's a coda to all of this, both the 1999 Floodlight scam and the modern micro betting explosion. Remember when Andy Sellers said he tracked the conspirators' travels around the world to youth tournaments, but didn't have the scope to complete his investigation? He doesn't think they were shutting off the lights at those tournaments.
What we think they were probably doing is they were probably either bribing or blackmailing young players who in the future might become professionals, who in the future they might need to help them manipulate the result. So we heard that, they would buy some of these African teams, some of the players didn't have any football boots or only had one pair of boots. So they'd buy them football boots. Sometimes they would do honey traps with them, just so that they then had those players in their grasp if in the future they became top internationals or top players, and then they could call on them to, miss a penalty or whatever it might be.
And remember Roger Firth, the Charlton FC security guard who took the bribe to let the Syndicate into the football grounds?
They mentioned £20,000, which to me was 2 years' wages. I agreed to let them fix the lights for £20,000.
Targeting the smaller, most vulnerable links in the sports integrity chain sounds a lot like the syndicates were gearing up to fix modern microbetting, right? Getting one or two players or staff in your pocket to do something minor and innocuous for a potential payout. They were doing this in 1999. Match fixing, gambling, all of it is always growing and changing with the times. Nobody expected the triads to cut the power. Nobody expected microbetting to become a weak point in market manipulation.
Yeah, I really don't know if there is a way to stop match fixing. Banning gambling clearly doesn't stop match fixing, right? There's been all sorts of player manipulation, point shaving scandals and the like when gambling was illegal, and we have had plenty of them now that it is legal. I think the way you sort of stop it or limit it, reduce it in today's day and age is by reducing the ability to bet on markets that are extremely readily susceptible to manipulation. You are reducing the odds that these desperate and poor young men who aren't being paid well might try to manipulate their own performance at the behest of making a couple tens of thousands of dollars gambling.
You can't stop match fixing. You can only try and guard the most vulnerable markets by observing the most vulnerable people. Where smaller illicit dollar amounts could transform a player or official's life without alerting the authorities. Pay attention to them. Protect them. So when fixers do try and exploit sports' most marginalized figures, you're not left in the dark. This episode of Echo of the Whistle was produced, written, edited, and hosted by me, Harry Swartout. Special thanks for this episode goes out to Andy Sellers, Peter Kenny Jones, and John Cohen. A complete list of sources for this story can be found in the show notes. Please give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review so you don't miss any new episodes. If you're craving more, head over to Patreon and support Echo of the Whistle for bonus content and to make sure we can keep telling you uncommon sports stories. Until next time, keep playing.